But part of the reason that you would say your maturity wasn't there yet is that you were trying to get yourself caught up to speed in a very complicated world. So if we go back 300 years ago, it was like, Joe, pick up that spade, go into the farm, you're done, and then have some kids and you're dead at 35. But maturity takes on a different meaning when you're taking in all kinds of information from a complicated economy, from complicated relationships. No one's assigned you a spouse, all the things. So your brain has to be in a place to digest that. Is that making sense as a kind of scope of adolescence? You've gone from being this creature who's cared for in your home to being able to survive alone and thrive in a complex and demanding world.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonpbc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's ADYTONPBC.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're opening up the Green Notebook of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, best-selling author, and devoted dad, Matt Richtel. Matt recently released his book, How We Grow Up, and I couldn't have picked a better time to read it. My own son is in the thick of adolescence, and I just came from leading a cavalry squadron last year that was filled with young soldiers who are still navigating that same period of life. And this conversation hit home in so many ways. Matt brings decades of reporting and a deep empathy to one of the most misunderstood and consequential phases of life. We dig into what adolescence really is, not just a number, but a critical biologically driven period of testing limits, forming identity, and preparing for independence. From his reporting at the New York Times to the stories in his book, Matt unpacks the neuroscience, the history, and the very human struggles behind the transition from childhood to becoming an adult. We also explore what it means to lead and parent through this season of life, why taking things personally can do more harm than good, how to support growth without smothering it, and why preparing our kids for the siege of adolescence means stepping back so they can step forward. So whether you're raising teenagers or adolescents, or you're leading young adults, this episode is packed with insights that can help you show up with more empathy, wisdom, and patience. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, Matt Richtel.
Thanks, Joe.
I came across this book literally a week ago, and I read the synopsis of it, and I bought it and I read it in 3 days. And I just came from a couple things going on in my life. Is my son is starting his sophomore year of high school, so he's smack dab in the middle of adolescence. He's 50, he just turned 15, and then I just finished up commanding an organization in Europe, a cavalry squadron, and like 85-90% of my soldiers were 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, like on the tail end of adolescence. And I saw several of them make mistakes that unfortunately are going to stick with them for the rest of their lives.
And Joe, I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. And part of the reason I got interested in this was that I had spent a bunch of time at the New York Times looking at adolescent mental health. And I'd realized that there was an even more fundamental question, which is what is adolescence? And for the better part of 125 years, we didn't really understand that. And we're starting to hone in on what that answer is. And it really matters for just the reason you said, which is like if we're trying to raise kids without correct information, it will imperil how well we do, and we can even be counterproductive.
Well, let's begin by this. First of all, you and I have both used the word adolescence,
Yes.
not teenagers,
Yes.
in this interview. So what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, the distinction is that teenagers are years as marked by age, I guess would be 10 or 12, depending on what you up through 19. Adolescence is actually a little bit gummy and has changed, but I think of it as, and I'll back this up with biology and science, I think of it as a time period that spans from when you are cared for and then hit puberty, which starts you off on the process of beginning to care for yourself. And the reason that that time frame doesn't correlate with teens is just about years. This is a period of time that is both biological and in some ways, Joe, economic. Can I elaborate on what I mean by that?
Please do.
Because when the idea of adolescence first started in 1904, it emerged out of an idea that the economy was specializing, and these children who had this is what adolescence used to be, if there was such a thing. 300 years ago, you were a kid, you hit puberty, you started working, and then you got married off. And in around 1900, we see lifespans increasing, and through industrialization, we see specialization. And now you got to start training these kids. And now they're hanging around. And now this time period that was artificial before, if it even existed, starts to exist. And that goes from, let's say, puberty till now. People will argue that adolescence can go into the early 20s because depending, like, let's take the military, which my son has contemplated. You're going to make a 5-year commitment, or what's the commitment now? I don't know.
It just depends on the type of contract you sign. But like for me, coming out of college on a scholarship, I owed the Army 4 years. I was 23 years old.
Yeah.
And I would say that, mature wise, I was still a little bit in that adolescent phase. For a new recruit, could be 2, 3, 4 year commitment, depending on, what they sign for.
In a few minutes, or even more quickly, we're going to get into what physiologically was happening inside you. But part of the reason that you would say your maturity wasn't there yet is that you were trying to get yourself caught up to speed in a very complicated world. So if we go back 300 years ago, it was like, Joe, pick up that spade, go into the farm. You're done. and then have some kids and you're dead at 35. But maturity takes on a different meaning when you're taking in all kinds of information from a complicated economy, from complicated relationships. No one's assigned you a spouse, all the things. So your brain has to be in a place to digest that. Is that making sense as a kind of scope of adolescence? You've gone from being this creature who's cared for in your home to being able to survive alone and thrive in a complex and demanding world.
Right. Yeah. I would imagine the body's got to make some changes to be able to do that as a full grown human.
Totally. And the body is the easy part. The brain is the complicated part, and it's gotten more complicated. This gives me an opportunity, if you will, to let me kind of, even beyond where I went in the book, to explain a definition of adolescence I've consolidated even since I wrote, which is, this is how I've come to think about it. There's a way in which adolescence for the brain is the most intense information processing period you'll ever go through. You're trying to reconcile two things. One of them is the known. The known is what your parents tell you. You've told your son, eat with a fork. This is where the napkin goes. Don't run in the street. But you've also told him things, and all those things seem like, okay, those are really important things. But when you hit adolescence, you actually have to put those things to the test. Why? Because the world is changing, A, and B, if someone just tells you how to survive, sometimes you need to test that. And what happens with adolescents, we used to think of it as they were rebelling, they were being obnoxious. You can characterize it as that, but in many ways, they're testing what they've been told against the actual world. Was it a unit? What was the group you were?
Yeah, it was a squadron, a cavalry squadron in Europe.
Cavalry squadron in Europe. So I'm guessing that there was a spectrum of young people, some who took more for granted that the things you told them were true, and some who were really testing the boundaries. Is that?
That's it. That's fair. And some who, again, and this is the thing I get stuck with, and even looking back on my own period of adolescence,
Yes.
There were risks that I took.
Yes.
This could have been a completely different. We wouldn't be talking right now,
dude. Let's not do that podcast.
No,
I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but it would not do well.
But and then there was, soldiers who made those mistakes that, that'll never come back from them. Probably there's some that I watched grow. Yeah. And I know that they're going to be the future leaders of the military. And the thing that you talk about over and over again in the book is this idea of those are the ones that will be handing the baton off to, 5-10 years in the military.
And that's we're getting into so many rich areas. But one thing I want to say to parents, and commanders, you guys probably know this better than most. It's not personal. When your kid is taking a risk, and that risk can take a lot of forms. It could be just the obnoxious, I'm not going to talk to you right now, which is its own kind of risk of being rude. There's the drinking a beer. There's the extreme heroin. All of those are pushing the boundaries a little bit to see what actually works in the real world. Some of those people who push boundaries are going to be really valuable to us. They're going to be like the guys and women who skirted the edge a little bit, but maybe they were creating something. I mean, can you remember some guy? Maybe it's you. Can you remember some people who played around the edges who you're like, wow, that person's a big thinker?
I mean, like looking back, I'm sure there were people in my close circle of friends from even high school to even college. People were like, you were more concerned with keg parties than you were reading, writing, and thinking. And now like you've built this platform. So that same, the boundaries that I pushed all through high school, a lot of times in college, I was able to take those and, push the boundaries of how we do leader development in the Army. But again, I just had to make it to the other side of that to
I would argue that you had to make it to the other side. I would also argue that you have an authentic connection to what some of the boundaries are because you tested them. And a lot of what helps us thrive is authenticity. I want to be, we're getting into, again, some multiple issues, and I don't want to suggest to parents or adolescents that doing dumb stuff is smart. But I just want to go anchor this point. For parents, when we come down on our kids about some of that experimentation, I think we have to pick our battles. And I think that we really can't take it personally. I want to explain why that's so important, why taking it personally can make things worse. So, this construct I discussed before, you're reconciling the known and the unknown. Joe's parents tell him, these are the rules. And Joe says, okay, there's the user manual, but I got to go actually figure that out if I'm going to survive. So I start testing around some stuff. Sometimes when those things get really tense, when you can't reconcile the known and the unknown. So let's give an example from today. My known is that reading books is great. My kids' known is that learning from podcasts is how you get information. So when I come down on my kids and say, why aren't you reading? There's a way, you're laughing. You've had this conversation.
I've had this. Go ahead.
It's tricky because could we both be right?
Yes. Yeah.
That in our generation, the way the structure of society worked, if we read books, we became informed, our intellect developed, we could be conversant with our friends, all the things. But it's also possible that in the world they're seeing, economic survival depends on taking in information another way. It's not just what the fashion is, it's the way the world is moving. When we become personally hurt by that, we're really complicating their ability to make sense of that environment. So there's a difference between saying, your mom and I love you, you're not reading books, you're being such a jerk, do you know all the stuff I do for you? There's a difference between that and saying, hey, this is what we did. It was really valuable for us. I'd encourage it, but more than that, I'd encourage you to take in and think about information. Figure out how to do that. Does that distinction make sense?
It does. It does. And I see that. And so I think, going back to them finding their own way, pushing the boundaries, taking risk, like what's happening neurologically?
Yeah.
That's
You said it earlier. You said, I felt like I took all these risks. So now, Joe, we have the neurobiology to actually know. Years ago, when it was all observational science, people would be like, oh, that kid's being an idiot. That must be the idiot time. That's the Neanderthal time. But now we can look inside the brain and, for example, we can see the neurochemicals that change the balance between risk and reward calculation. And a lot of adolescents, but not all of them, are really sensitive to reward and a little less responsive to risk. So the accelerator's pushed up and the brakes are pulled back. You might say, isn't that a recipe for disaster? I would say that's nature's way of programming some testing. That's how we know the testing isn't like some failure on ours to raise them correctly. It's actually evolution's way of saying, you've got to go probe. So on one level, that's a key thing that is happening. Another key thing, let me just pause there and say, because before I get long-winded.
Yeah, it's I think the evolutionary thing, and just I want to add to it and you jump back in again.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Matthew Walker's studies on sleep?
No, tell me, please.
So he wrote a book called Why We Sleep. And what he found is the circadian rhythm of teenagers, it changes. And his hypothesis is that it's evolution's way of having them stay up out of our, because parents, we're going to bed 9, 10 o'clock. Our kids are staying up even later. So they can actually make decisions without us being around and grow.
It's brilliant. It stands to reason. I haven't read it, but it completely conforms to my understanding of this. And I might add that for the moment, we've made this about them, their need to grow, but in many ways, it's also about us. Because we're handing over power and responsibility. Now, right now, it seems like we have a long time to do that, but it wasn't very long ago, 1800, we lived to 40. Your adolescent, your teenager, whatever you want to call them, had better figure stuff out because they were going to have to go do it. And they were going to determine not just if they survived, but if the species survived. That's the purpose of what Walker's talking about. It's the purpose of the evolutionary biology in this book, is that these guys are about to carry the torch. And if we only give them the torch once they're in the rainstorm, being battered, it'd be like sending your boys into and men and women into battle with no training. It's an absurd notion.
Right. Yeah. So it's evolution's way of preparing them to be full grown adults, which goes back to that, that definition you have is life's preparation.
Yes.
To be grown up. So how does that work with like the gas and the brakes?
So the gas and the brakes. So at our stage in life, let's call ours more there's a phrase that's used, homeostasis, in balance. When we make an assessment of a calculation, should I walk into that casino? After some amount of learning, you're like, that doesn't end well. And even if I wind up a little bit ahead, I'm very likely to blow it a half an hour later, and I'm going to wind up in a bad mood and hangry.
Right.
But when that's a calculation of like, what is the risk? What is the reward? What's the practical thing here to do based on life's experience? But if you've never seen a casino before, and you could make a case that there are lots of versions of casinos in our lives. Should I ask that girl out? Should I don't want to give any ideas, throw that egg at that car? Should I TP that house? Should I skip class? Skip class is an example of a casino in a way. I will get a certain amount of pleasure from this. There's some risk that I'm now downplaying in my brain neurologically in an effort to get what that reward is. Why? So that I can make an informed decision about what really happens. Returning to don't take it personally. Your kid skips class once. They're not saying, F you, mom and dad, I never listened to you. Quite the contrary. And I can kind of blow you away with a study now.
Go for it.
Can I tell you about the Puy-de-Schwaltz study?
Please.
Okay. If anybody who's listening says, Matt and Joe, Puy-de-Schwaltz sounds like a nonsense word, and it is. These Stanford researchers, this always blows my mind every time I think about it. They took some young people and they put them in a neuroimaging machine. And the young people spanned ages from pre-puberty to adolescent. And they had, while these kids were in the neuroimaging machine, young people, they had them listen to two voices say the nonsense word Puy-de-Schwaltz. One was their mother, and one was a strange woman's voice. After puberty, they could tell that the brain and reward circuitry of the brain lit up more for the stranger's voice than it did for the parent. Theories? What's your theory?
Yeah, it's you got to get away from mom and dad right now.
Yeah. And why is that?
Because you are going to eventually take their place in the species.
And you better know how to get along with strangers, and you better be aware of the person on the subway, of your boss, of your teammate, for a long time, you could just listen to your parents and be fine. Why does that study blow me away? Because in the simplest form, it tells us that when our kids ignore us on the couch and they're listening to TikTok, or or they're paying more attention to their peers than us, it's not because they're can I say a-holes?
You could say assholes, and that was the word that popped in my head.
It's not expressly because of that. Now that doesn't mean we can't say, hey, my son's Milo. Milo, not cool way to treat your dad. But if I'm taking that personally, again, if I say, hey, bud, how can you treat me like that? I'm so good to you. I drove you to all your baseball games. Like, I just bought you lunch. Like, I'm laying a lot of stuff in there that is pretty hard for his brain to make sense of when his brain's saying, not dad, buddies.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, zero account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. And I think it's so important too, because, going back to the casino thing, like a lot of us know that because we had experience. But what you're saying is this isn't just experiential. This is biological.
This is biological.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I said this before, but I really want to make sure parents understand, and adolescents, that this doesn't mean we're not laying down some pretty hard rules. The distinction I draw around rules is that there's rules that must be enforced or your kid will not survive. So the information processing doesn't take place. And there's things you look a little differently at. For instance, drinking and driving is like, I don't know, in our household, I will rain down terror you've never seen before. I don't mean this exactly the way I say it, but if I find out you've had a beer and taken an Uber somewhere, I look at that situation very differently.
Right.
But partly because I've said I'm drawing a huge line around this thing that is so dangerous. Running across the road is dangerous. Hurting someone else is dangerous. There are these areas where you can't compromise, and the lesson must be clear. But I think you want to ask about the book, less so parenting. So I just want to make sure everybody understands this is not a free pass to, let them be the a-hole.
Yeah. And I think it's very important to understand. I think it helps develop empathy. For me, like that. And that was one of the things that was easier to do with some of my soldiers than it is my own son, was like, even though they crossed this line that they can't come back from. Yeah. I didn't treat them like they were the asshole. Like I was like, hey man.
When you introduced it, what did you say to them?
Oh, I would just be like, hey, listen, like you've crossed this line. Like my job as a commander is to hold you accountable for it. Like, you may be the best person in the world. You've had a great track record so far, but like this is a consequence of your action. And so I encourage you to like go through the consequences, whatever it is, whether it's taking pay, whether it's extra duty, something like that. And then I would remind them that it was something from Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut who came on the show. He said, there's not a problem so bad that we can't make it worse. Yeah. And that's what I would tell them. I was like, this is bad, but you can make it a lot worse.
One of the things I learned in the research of the book is that it's really hard for parents to show that kind of, I don't know,
Yes. Yeah.
professionalism. And there's a couple reasons why. One is that the amount of fear we have that something is going to happen to our kids is actually oftentimes very disproportionate to what it is. Like if you read the list of fears parents have, um, the idea that your kid would be abducted by a stranger is very small. I mean, it would happen from a relative, if that, and it almost never happens. It makes it, if you extend that idea out to the conversation you had, instead of saying in that situation, which I'd understand, a parent might be terrified their kid was going to wind up destitute. And what you did in that situation was say, hey, I don't know, how did you handle that differently? How would you have handled that if it was your kid?
I would have lost my mind, Matt. I would have I would have yelled. I would have taken it personally. I would have, so real quick, could you explain this? And then I'll explain the why behind it.
Yeah.
Could you explain why I get so upset? Could you explain this idea of castaways?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the ways I think about adolescents is, or a chief way I think about them is castaways. They are casting away from this known area in order to discover and explore what works in the world and something about themselves that works in the world. And those are two related things. This is a period that can feel extremely threatening to parents, even though it is vital for survival. You were going to say the why.
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of the Odyssey and the Odysseus story and the hero's
Yes.
journey. And one of the things, from that story is that Cersei he had to face certain challenges. He had to leave certain islands. But at any point along that journey before he made his way home, he could have stayed with Cersei. He could have gotten killed or eaten by the Cyclops. And so I think like that's my biggest fear, Matt, is that, I recognize through reading your book is that, my son right now and eventually my daughter is on this journey, this odyssey, so to speak, and I want them to be able to make it back home. But I recognize they have to see the Cyclops, they have to go to Cersei's island, they have to do all those things first.
One of the reasons we name this book How We Grow Up is because secretly I intend it to be for them and for us. Because I believe that, to your astronaut's point, for them to grow up well, we have to grow up a little bit and create a platform where they can do what they need to do, where we can let them develop some independence while also setting down, saying, look, the Cyclops, don't F with the Cyclops. Like, there are certain islands you probably shouldn't dock at, but there's some other places you're going to go to that if I interfere with, I'm going to make your life harder in the long run.
Right.
And when I say how we grow up, for me as a parent, I can put that in a couple concrete terms. That is meant for me understanding that I am not the best friend of my kids. Because if I'm the best friend of my kids, how do they cast away? How will they learn? If I am first mate, that's a lonely proposition, Joe. We had these creatures we loved. We cuddled them in bed. They clung to us. We were like monkeys together in the best possible way. And now they must go.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. Well, I want to tell a story and then get to this next piece. So I'm at this dinner in Beirut with a bunch of officers from the Lebanese military, and they are just like it's husband and wives,
Okay.
and they're just this group of people at the table. They're just very animated, very emotional about this conversation. And I'm wondering, like, are they talking about what's going on in Israel? Are they talking about, like, some geo-strategic thing, or what are they arguing about? And so I asked the interpreter, I was like, what are they talking about? He goes, they're arguing about how much time their kids spend playing Fortnite. And they're trying to figure out what's the right amount of time between doing that and going outside. And I recognize that I have so much in common with them right now. And I immediately jumped into the conversation with my interpreter, because I was like, yeah, we're facing the same thing.
What did you guys decide?
It was undecided. It was just like, hey, this is something they have to do, but they got to make sure that they do their homework first. That was kind of the big thing. So I think, something that's new that I didn't have to deal with as much. I had Nintendo, I had Atari, but I didn't have a device in my hand, at all hours of the day.
I spent what came before this book was a project for the New York Times called The Inner Pandemic, and it had to do with the mental health crisis. And we tried to explore what was going on among adolescents and whether the phone is to blame. That in turn led me to ask, okay, we've asked a lot about the phone. Who's the person holding the phone, the adolescent? But in this book, I do delve into some complicated science, and I will attempt to transport with you you were in Beirut?
Yes.
Do I need any protective gear?
No. Go ahead.
So the narrative currently is that the adolescent brain is being rewired or dramatically harmed by use of devices. The research doesn't back that up explicitly. In other words, if you take some young people and have them use Instagram or Facebook or whatever, some of them will be in worse moods and some will be in better moods. But that's not really the question you're asking. I only say that because I want to make sure people understand using a device in and of itself is not proven to cause you anxiety, depression, any more than reading a book. The question you're asking is the operative one, though, is how much time is the right amount of time? And you actually you're way ahead of me, and you didn't need me. You were time zones ahead or behind? Which way?
Yeah, I was ahead. Yeah.
Ahead. The thing we do know is that when you use a device a lot, you displace things that we know are valuable for your health. It's pretty hard to sleep 10 hours a day if you're on the device 15 hours a day. The math doesn't work. So I'm going to anchor in some of the stuff that I've learned in this book is vital. Sleep, using your body physically, in-person interaction, because remember, going back to adolescence, you're learning to survive in a social and economic world. You and I have to read each other's faces. We have to read each other's mannerisms. These are things that help our brains develop. But what we don't know is how many hours in that screen are okay once you've satisfied those other things. And I will complicate this one layer further, which is that parents have a tendency to hew to what we thought we knew and the economic circumstances that we were raised in. So we look at the time they spend on devices wasted time, but it's very hard to know how much of that is training for something. I don't know the answer to that yet. What I would urge and what I've learned is make sure your kids do the things you know are essential first. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. I think that I think that there's a lot to be. I grew up on video games, and so I learned a lot of problem solving through playing video games. Just trying different things until I came out the other side. So I'm not anti-device, but I do, and I didn't understand it until I read your book. This idea of displacement that if you're doing one thing, it's there's only 24 hours in a day. That hasn't changed at all. So if you're doing one thing, you're not doing another.
Comes at the expense of something else. Full
Yes.
stop.
Yeah. So I think that's like a big thing for us now is like, for our daughter who's younger on the Kindle, like, are you getting outside? Like,
Yeah,
jump in the pool, go
yeah.
swim for a little bit. And then when you're done, you're tired, then you can jump on. But like, even putting boundaries on that, setting screen times, things like that we continue to do to try to, again, protect from I don't know what, because like you said, I don't know what the world's going to look like 20, 30 years from now.
And
And
some of the stuff, say, my kids do, like my daughter is artistic and designs all kinds of things. My son has flirted with selling different things. He's making some music online. Like, that is the functional equivalent of me writing stories when I was a kid. I guess I would draw a distinction between that and 20 hours of PlayStation all day, but the mere use of the screen isn't the problem. That said, there are some spikes in mental health problems, and I would like to address what appears to be behind them, so that because it feeds into what I learned about how we grow up in the modern age. We talked earlier about how experimentation happened in the outside. Or sorry, the Odyssey. That experimentation was physical. Cyclops, Circe, go down the list. Over the last few decades, increasingly, pediatricians have seen more mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, and they've even begun to eclipse broken bones. I call this generation rumination because they're spending more time experimenting with ideas in their heads in the virtual space. Why wouldn't they get some injuries there? They used to stub a toe, they used to break an arm. I mean, I don't know about you, but I had multiple broken bones and nails in feet and all those things. That doesn't mean this experimentation is better or worse, but it does mean we need to think about how to heal them. And I guess what one of the ways we grow up is by collectively trying to help young people through these difficult emotional times in a very fast changing world where ideas are part of the landscape.
yeah, it's super hard. And I was, I'm been reading a lot of Plutarch lately. And one of the things he talks about is this idea of preparing for a siege. He's like, back in the ancient world, when you would prepare for a siege, you would load up on, water, meat, bread, all sorts of stuff, because you didn't know how long it was going to last. And I think, as parents, and this is, I think, a challenge for military leaders because
That's a
we're
great parallel, by the way.
thanks.
That is a great parallel.
As we're very busy, but the fact that we need to prepare our kids for the siege of adolescence,
Yeah.
and do as much as we can to load them up, anchor them somewhere, when we're talking about values.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have to step away because we're not going to be able to outlast the siege for them.
The once again, your questions and your observations are really awesome. And
I
they,
have a lot of time to think. I'm retired now, Matt. So I
what,
just write and
are
think
you
all day.
retired?
I am. I am.
Why is my hair so much grayer than your hair?
Hair product. I don't
And
know.
your teeth are so much whiter than my teeth. I like the whole thing. Just okay.
Military for
How
your
we
son, military service. It does wonders for your
does
body.
wonders? Because I'm thinking about this next time. Because you're more well read. I interview you, but I get to retire.
There you go. Let's do it.
Let's do it. The siege of adolescence. A couple points that implicit in what you raised. I think we have to start teaching them some of the ways to deal with the emotional distress that comes from reconciling the known, what we tell them, and the unknown in a very fast moving world. And I'd give you this analogy. If you want to remember what it's like to be an adolescent, it's happened to you recently, or all of us have had a version of this. Something's happened in our relationship or marriage or at our job, and maybe it's happened simultaneously. And in the course of that, we pull up to a red light and somebody gives us the finger and we go into road rage.
Yes.
And under a different set of circumstances, we wouldn't do that. And we're really not, maybe they didn't give us the finger. Maybe we just perceived it because we needed to displace our frustration. We occasionally experience that. That is the idea of dealing with shifting circumstances in a highly sensitized moment. That is what adolescents do all the time in every facet of their lives. When you get road rage, let's just say adolescents go through this period. They slam the door and say, Dad, everyone in ninth grade hates me. That's it. Everybody, no one will ever speak to me again. That is the functional equivalent of road rage because it's wholly irrational. And in that moment, have you ever had road rage?
Yes. All the
Have you ever
time.
wanted to fight a guy and you can't believe it afterwards?
I won't admit it on the podcast, but yes.
Like you drive away and you're like, thank God I didn't get out of my car. What happened to me right there? One of the ways we prepare adolescents for the siege of adolescence is by giving them some understanding that at times they're going to have an information processing overload. They're going to have a breakdown. They're going to displace. They're going to explode. And in those moments, it's not our job to say, hey, that guy didn't mean anything. Or don't you realize, Bobby, not everyone in ninth grade hates you. Our job is to help them get through that emotional moment so then we can have the rational conversation. We don't need to preach at them in that moment. We don't need to yell at them in that moment. And I get into some of the coping mechanisms in this book. They're strange, some of them seemingly. You could put your face in the snow. You could take a cold shower. You can go for a run. There's a lot of things you can do to melt those neurochemicals, and then you can get to the rational point. If nothing else for parents in this book, I'd hope, and others, I hope you guys read this part about how to cope in a world that can cause a lot of distress that we can displace into really bad things. And we don't want to.
Yeah, I was just, even in this interview, Matt, I was thinking about it. Like, I think going into parenting, my idea of parenting was like, hey, like hold my hand as we cross the road, or like, hey, don't pick up that snake. It's poisonous. Like, again, everything's in the physical world and I'm prepared for that.
Yeah.
But with this generation rumination, with the chaos, so to speak, that they're facing right now with the onslaught of information and experiences.
Yes.
It's almost like as parents, we need to be able to prepare ourselves to navigate the inner worlds with our kids.
So let me ask you, when you hit those, I know you're retired and life is so good and you just read all day. But what are your coping mechanisms when you hit overload? When you know it, do you call a buddy? Do you talk to your wife? What do you do to get over that? When you know you're not really mad at the electrician, that you just didn't get enough sleep, what do you do?
After I do or say something that I'll regret, I then try to, go to a quiet space, either journal, I'll go for a walk, or I'll work out.
Okay. What you're talking about, as simple as it sounds, Joe, is like as vital as could be for our society today. For young people and a lot of us living in a fast changing, chaotic world who are occasionally experiencing a version of adolescence ourselves, we are often not stepping back for the second we need. And I am a very non-partisan, non-political person. I tend to see like the anger and partisanship and other stuff and conflict as an outgrowth of the inability to deal with these, not inability, I don't want to say people are failing, but we haven't quite learned how to channel these difficult experiences. If you go back to being an adolescent 200 years ago, if there was such a thing, or 100 years ago, you didn't have to take in so much information. If your parents told you X, it probably stayed like X for a while. But now if they tell you X, X is already halfway to Z by the time it came out of our mouths. So they're dealing with trying to make sense of all this stuff. We got to give them ways to get through that don't involve, I mean, I don't mean to be this extreme, but picking up a gun, or I mean, any version of that thing.
Yeah, I just want quick plug, like here in North Carolina, my buddy and a bunch of other special forces folks, they're running with this league called Rise Up. And, a lot of youth sports now, it's like you talk about in the book, it's super expensive. It's a specialization. It's about winning.
Yeah.
And, this group of men and women are using football to
Brilliant.
as a vessel to teach these things, again, to fill up the castles as these kids are going, teaching
Just
values
brilliant.
and things like that. And so I think that's a really great point that you bring up, Matt, is that we've just got to be a lot more deliberate, because we are passing the baton to them, and we could end up with a bunch of angry people yelling at each other
So we've got to
online.
model it and teach it. But I just have a question. How close are you to Charlotte?
2.5 hours.
I will be there Thursday.
Oh man.
But
Okay.
this won't have run by then.
No, it won't. It won't.
Okay,
Yeah.
then it's moot. I'm a bookstore called Cleary's, and there's a young man in the book named Henry who I've come to cherish his family. Unfortunately, he was one of the few who did not survive in this book. I don't want to give anything away about it, but it's a painful, poignant story that sort of underscores the need that we have to think about the emotional and mental side of harm. They're not going to maybe see as many cyclopses now. They're not going to cross Colorado and Utah and Nevada in a covered wagon. But they are going to cross a bunch of ideas that are really complicated.
Man, I feel like we're writing a book together.
We're doing it. Hey, but it's not fair because you get to be retired.
Yeah. It's great. I work a lot, but it's all mental. It's all writing. Last question. How is this because you've been doing this research since 17, but like, how is the research and writing this book, how has it changed how you parent now?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think the biggest thing is not taking stuff personally. And it's a mixed blessing, Joe, because there are times I just want to hang out with the kids. And I'm like, hey, and they're talking to me a certain way, and I'm realizing that my job, it's not to be the military commander, but it's to recognize that there are some things I'm teaching them and modeling. And that involves being honest and authentic and clear, but it doesn't mean being their best friends. And there are times when they come to me with especially my daughter, and can want a certain kind of intimacy, and I'm just thrilled. Like, Dad, let's do the New York Times puzzles together. And I'm like, cherish this moment. It may never come again. But I think not taking it personally has helped me not infuse more drama into an already emotionally difficult situation, not because we don't have a wonderful family. I feel terribly blessed. It's because the neuroscience of the situation is guiding them somewhere else. And I have to be okay with that.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think for me too, that's my main takeaway. And, one of the decisions for me, Matt, to retire out of the military instead of continue to go is that my son was entering high school, and I wanted to be around and have the mental space to help him navigate these challenges up ahead.
Being around, though, that's good.
Yeah.
Around is not the same as not taking it personally.
Right. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, I recognize when I was working 70 hours a week, is that if something were to happen in middle school, I didn't necessarily have the emotional space or just the bandwidth to just sit down and have a cool, calm, collected conversation. And that's something that I'm working on now. is now that I am here and I am around to try to be able to do those things. But I now
That's awesome.
thanks, man. But understanding the neurology of what's happening, I think hopefully it
Hopefully.
makes me a lot more patient and understanding and empathetic.
Yeah. Well, listen, your references are awesome. We've done all the classics.
We have. Yeah, I was able to insert Plutarch and Homer into a episode on modern parenting. So
I'm gonna have to go start reading immediately.
Well, Matt, I appreciate your time today. I know that this is the day after or 2 days after book launch.
Book launch yesterday in New York.
Yesterday.
I was late today because got to DC, and we'll do one tonight, and then North Carolina, and then.
Well, this was I appreciate you making time for our audience, and then for military leaders listening to this episode, highly encourage you to read How We Grow Up, because again, I know what it's like. You're very busy, you're working all the time, and it's really hard to make space for our kids. But as Matt says in this interview, and as he wrote in the book, like, this is a crazy period, and they need some help out there. So again, Matt, thank you so much for your time today.
Dude, thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's